No, don't even say any of that. It doesn't really matter. Does it matter? It doesn't matter. Yeah, don't say that. Yeah, don't say that. Hello, and welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are too. So this is a spur of the moment video. It's going to be down and dirty, not a whole lot of detail. It's Saturday, the 2nd of March, and it's only 3 days until the Women's Prize for Fiction announces their long list. I'm super excited about it. I could barely stand it. It's ridiculous how I'm excited I am about this list. And of course, Booktube is inundated with predictions and upcoming reaction videos. And I've always thought, well, I say always, I haven't been following the prize for that long, but ever since I have been following it, I've always thought that I just didn't really have the literary chops to predict the list. I still don't. However, I have been working at a bookstore over the past year, and so I have been exposed to a lot more books than I normally have in the past, because a lot of times when these lists come out, these are books that I've not even heard of, but I'm going to try anyways. So I have a list of, I believe, 18 books. That is my Women's Prize long list. Have I read all of them? No, I've read a couple of them, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to mention which books I've read and which books I haven't. Let's start with the criteria that the Women's Prize for Fiction follows. And for the 2024 list, these are books written by women, published between April 1st of 2023 to March 31st of 2024, and then published in the UK during that time. Now, my list, did I do a deep dive and figure out exactly where and when these books were published? No, but I can tell you they have been published in those dates. I just am not sure if they're published in the UK. And the other criteria that is involved with the Women's Prize is that it's got to have accessibility, originality, and excellence in writing, of course. And that's kind of what I based my predictions / wish list on: originality and accessibility. So as we all know, there's a lot of literary fiction out there that is not quite accessible to your average reader. And I'm including myself in that average reader group. So I balanced it with those two things. Now, as the thumbnail says, here's something a little different, or however it is that I'm going to word it. There's going to be a couple of books on this list that you might have seen in other people's predictions, but I guarantee you're going to see some books on this list that you haven't seen on other people's lists. And that's really what I was going for. I'm going to not really go a whole lot into the synopsis of each book. I'm just going to kind of give you a snapshot of it and maybe why I chose it, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. But let's get started with the list. The first on my list is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I will tell you that I have read this book. I read it as an ARC and I absolutely loved it. And the second I finished it, I thought about the Women's Prize for Fiction. It's beautifully written. This is 1950s Jim Crow South. A young black boy who can communicate with ghosts is sent to the Reformatory for assaulting a young white boy. The evil warden forces young black boy to catch said ghost, but the ghosts are the only ones that can save all the boys at the Reformatory from the evil warden. This is based on true events. Well, maybe not the ghost part, but the Reformatory and all the evil shit that went down there. Super important story that needs to be told, and it's told in a very original way. Next up is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. This takes place during World War I. We have a brother and a sister who are both serving in the war. Sister as a nurse, brother as a soldier. Sister gets wounded, gets sent home, finds out brother is killed in action, but something doesn't add up. So she goes back to volunteer at a hospital and she starts hearing stories about haunted trenches. And she wonders if her brother wasn't quite lost to the battlefield and maybe he was lost to something quite different. Again, originality wins out on this one. Next up, I have The List of Suspicious Things by Jenny Godfrey. This one was in my goodie bag at the Women's Prize for Fiction live show last year. So I'm thinking that was kind of, you know, the Women's Prize winking at us saying, be on the lookout for this one because you're going to hear a lot more about it come the spring next year. I haven't read this one yet. I have it on my shelf. I don't know what I'm waiting for. I've heard nothing but good things. This also kind of follows true events. It takes place in the late 70s, early 80s in Yorkshire. Thatcher has just been made the prime minister, and there's also a serial killer running around Yorkshire, and a young woman decides to team up with her aunt to try to investigate on their own. It's coming of age, it's mystery, it's right up my street. I can't wait to get to this one. The next one that has been getting a lot of talk is The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. Also interesting tidbit, I wish I still had it, I didn't hold on to it, but we got a little pamphlet in our goodie bag at the Women's Prize for Fiction that was like the first chapter of this book. Also, perhaps a little wink and a nudge from the Women's Prize. But I also featured this in one of my recent videos of new releases that I'm excited for. I think it starts off in 1935 or so, and you're following a young single Malayan mother. And for reasons, she is made to be a very unlikely spy against the Japanese invasion. Then you follow her 10 years later as those events affect her life a little bit more. As World War II is at its peak, her son has gone missing, and she's got 2 daughters who are at risk for all the things that can happen to young women when there are drunk soldiers all around. World War II historical fiction, again, something else that's just right up my street. Next up is Pet by Catherine Chidgey. I read this one. I absolutely loved it. Catherine Chidgey is a veteran of the Women's Prize, so I think this one is just going to cement that status. This is a coming-of-age thriller novel that takes place in New Zealand, and you're following a young 12-year-old girl, and like all her other classmates, she has a little bit of a crush on their teacher, who ends up not quite being who she seems to be. The next book I'm going to talk about is a book that a lot of people are talking about as far as predictions for the Women's Prize, and that is Penance by Eliza Clark. And I absolutely agree with this one, because this one basically explores the ethics of true crime. It follows, I believe, a horrific murder of a 16-year-old girl, and we are examining what happens when a person becomes more important and valuable in death than they ever were in life, and how so many people profit from the details of that death. So I think this is a very promising title for the long list. Next one is another one that featured on one of my new releases that I'm excited to come out, and that is The Future by Naomi Alderman. I think originality is an aspect here, but another thing that I forgot to mention earlier on that the Women's Prize also likes to get into, and that is topics that are relevant to the times we are in right now. And The Future basically follows a group of 5 friends who come up with this daring heist to save the world from the techie billionaires whose greed will change the world as we know it. So this one has originality and relevance in its corner. Next on my list is The Museum of Failures by Thridi Umrigar. This one follows an Indian man who, as a young man, left India for the United States to escape his relationship that he had with his mother. He ends up returning to India to adopt a baby and to care for his ill mom before it's too late. And when he discovers that his mom is much more ill than he realized, he decides to stay and help her recover. And in doing so, he finds a mysterious photograph in her apartment that reveals certain family secrets. So this is going to be about the complicated relationships between parents and children, the secrets that we keep, the secrets that we reveal, and all the effects that follow. Next up is another book that I read last summer, and that is Sea Change by Gina Chung. This is about a young woman who is dealing with heartbreak and loss and her fractious relationship with her mother. And her most solid relationship is with Dolores, who happens to be a giant Pacific octopus at the mall aquarium. And then Dolores happens to be the young woman's last connection to her father, who is a marine biologist who went missing on his last expedition. So not only is there the relevance of women dealing with heartbreak and loss in unusual ways, but I think this one also has some originality as far as connections with sea creatures. Is this a wink and a nod from me to Pod? Perhaps. Next, I have No Two Persons by Erica Bauermeister. This is a book within a book. We're following Alice, who after an incredible tragedy decides to write a novel. And this book follows the different stories as the book that Alice writes is read by different people, and how that book affects these different people in different ways. And of course, I think originality gives this one the leg up. I've seen this next one on a couple of people's lists, and that is Nightbloom by Peace Adzomedi. In this one, we are following two women who were childhood friends, almost to the point where they considered each other family. They were that close, always together. But as they grow older, their lives take different paths, and I believe we follow each path and how very different. One stays in Ghana, the other one goes to the United States, and then decades later, they come back together. And through their stories, we're exploring class and family. And I think there's also a clever exploration in the effects of memory in this one. I think this one has advantage in both relevance and originality. This next one I haven't heard anybody talk about, and it's one that I brought up in one of my recent videos. And this one is Brooklyn by Tracy Brown. This one follows our titular character, Brooklyn. She is a master manipulator. She learned how to hustle from her hustling parents. She is trying to make her way in New York City, and her life of hustling and conning and lying and cheating catch up with her. And as she lays dying, she recounts her life, thinking about the things that turned her into the calculating person that she is. And she's not trying to really figure out who would murder her, but really who wouldn't. Obviously, originality on this one. This next one has originality written all over it. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. It's a love or hate book. I haven't really heard anybody predict this one for the long list, but I think that it's an absolute shoo-in, and the book I'm talking about is Shark Heart by Emily Haybeck. This one follows the lives of this couple who are madly in love with each other, and they are a week into newlywed bliss when the husband gets a devastating diagnosis that he is going to eventually, over time, turn into a great white shark. As it happens, his consciousness and his memories and his thoughts are going to stay human and going to stay inherently him, but physically and biologically, he's going to turn into this shark. And we're dealing with how that would affect a relationship. But I think it goes really deeper than that. And we're going to be exploring abandonment, loss, caretaking, devotion, illness, and love. Next on my list is Piglet by Lottie Hazel. In this one, we're following a woman 2 weeks before she's scheduled to get married. Her fiance tells her of an epic betrayal, and the woman turns to food in an unusual way. This one's going to explore the complicated relationships that women have with food and just the messiness of life and how we deal with it. I think this next one, which has been talked about a lot over the past years, I think it's an obvious shoo-in, but I haven't seen it on a lot of people's prediction lists, and that is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. The story basically follows two women on opposite coasts of the United States who are brought together through tragedy and horror. But this whole thing is kind of based on the victims of a certain notorious serial killer whose name will remain unsaid here for reasons. And if you've read the book, you know, because he is never, I don't think, mentioned by name in the book. But even more so, this story explores and talks about the women who were victims of a man who was far less charming, far less clever, far less good looking and attractive and glamorous as the media made him out to be. Next up is a book that I have not heard anybody talking about, and that is OK Days by Jenny Mustard. This one on its surface seems like kind of a love story, but I think it goes a lot deeper. You're following the rise and fall of Sam and Lucas's affection for each other. But at the same time, we're looking at male body dysmorphia as well as women's reproductive rights, all while this young couple experience the pitfalls of modern love. So yeah, this one screams of relevance here. Next up is Green Dot by Madeline Gray. This one follows 24-year-old Hera, who is struggling with life as many in her generation do. And while she has always preferred women, she finds herself in a torrid love affair with a middle-aged journalist man. I think that's original in and of itself when we have a queer woman who decides to have a heterosexual relationship, which is the complete opposite of what happens in a lot of stories these days. Good or bad, I'm just saying it's original for now. But ultimately, this particular story is a dark and humorous and heartfelt look at coming into adulthood against the pitfalls of the 21st century. And finally, this last book I am super excited to read that I've only just heard of recently, and that is Loved and Missed by Susie Boyd. This one follows the story of a single woman who decides to take custody of her granddaughter to protect her from her drug-addicted daughter, and she tries to correct all the mistakes that she made the first time around. I can't quite put my finger on exactly why I picked this one. It just kind of smacks of Women's Prize for Fiction. That's it. Those are my predictions for the Women's Prize long list. What did you think about this list? What are your predictions? What do you hope to see on the long list? I would love to hear all of your thoughts, or you could just say hi down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please give that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be great. I will see you all very, very soon, especially after the long list is announced on Tuesday, March 5th. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.